Alright, so in this next Photoshop 101 video, we're going to talk about the Layer Styles panel. So to go to Layer Styles panel, I've got my text here, Layer Styles. I'm going to go ahead and click on it, and if I right click, I can click on Blending Options, or I can double click on the open space to the right of that layer, and it's going to open up my Layer Style panel. The Layer Style panel, to me, is the most important tool in Photoshop. It allows you to add different stylings to text or shapes or the background of your image or all sorts of different things. So we'll start at the very top up here and we'll go down. We'll try and do this whole thing in this video in under 20 minutes. The styles at the very top are the preset collection of styles. So Photoshop comes with a few. I think it's just basic natural fur. I think those are the main three basic things. You can click those and you can add. So this first one is going to be no styles. The second one is just going to be a little drop shadow that comes behind it. Those are the two basic styles that come with Photoshop, and that just adds a little style, makes it a little bit more three-dimensional. If we click on this, it'll remove all styles from it. Natural is going to give us a bunch of presets to make things look like natural. So this is going to make it look like dirt. So we've got dirt back here. That's going to make it look like water, like a kind of a rusty metal, almost wood grain, grass, rock, marble, some kind of rock, maybe some stone, and then like a tile look. So styles enable you to do this. There are a lot of styles that you can get. I've created some styles. There are also styles that you can get from brusheasy.com and a bunch of other websites online. If you Google Photoshop styles, there's a lot of free options out there for you that are already pre-made. You don't have to mess with them. You don't have to make anything on your own. But we'll jump into, we're going to go ahead and erase that so we're back to our regular. By default, it starts here at Blending Options. Blending options, I don't really mess with a whole lot that's in this opening front section. You can change this stuff. This drop down is the blend mode, kind of like we talked about the last couple videos ago. The opacity of what it is, how much of it is going to be filled, and then all this stuff. But like again, I don't mess with any of this really. I kind of just leave blending options the same. I mess with more of these options here down at the bottom. Bevel and emboss. If you click on an option on the right hand side in the open space, it will give you a check mark on that, and it will add that to your layer automatically. When you have a check mark, it means it's added to the layer. So bevel and emboss does exactly that. It gives you a bevel on the exterior of your shape. By default, bevel and emboss are set to all of these here. You have a highlight mode of white. It's a little hard to see because the image is a little bit big, but essentially if you were to jack that up a little bit, that top layer up here, it gets a little bit of a white shadow on it. We'll set that back to its normal 50%. You can change where it's beveling, so you can do inside, you can do outside, so it'll give you a raised look, inner is an inner look, emboss, pillow, all that kind of stuff. So it's something to mess around with. You can also set the depth, so say we want to make that bevel a little bit bigger, we want it to be an inner bevel. We can change the size, so it'll modify and change the size of the bevel. We can soften it up a little bit when we change the size so it's not as harsh. There's a ton of options here. You can also set the angle of what the bevel is. So right now we're at 90 degrees and it's using global light. Global light is important. It will play off of every single layer style. So if you have that checked, everything that you do is going to be set to whatever angle the global light is set to, and anytime you change it in any of these, it will also change it. So if we wanted to set it to 120 degrees, it'll just change that bevel to 120 degree angle rather than a straight 90 degree up and down. You can change the different contours. Right now we're at linear. You can make them rounded, or you can change make double waves or a bunch of sporadic hills up and down, so it'll change based on these keeping things linear is not bad. And then you can obviously change the modes of these. These are all the same things we had went over before, but I recommend leaving, if you're going to do a bevel, leaving those the same. But there's that option, and then there's contour, which just adds a little bit more shape based off of, you know, the actual contour that you want to pick. Leaving that linear will just give you a little bit more linear, and you can make it a cone, and a lot of different things there. And then you can switch the range, so you can make this bigger or smaller. Something that's a lot of fun to mess around with is bevel, just because it gives you some pretty cool texture to your fonts or your shapes or what you're doing. And then there's also texture. Adding texture into it allows you to select a pattern, and it will add the texture based on the color of that. So it'll modify it. You know, this originally is like a green and black thing, but it gives you that texture of kind of like a leaves or rock. With one of my textures, like I've got a leather texture that I created, it'll just add texture to it, and then you can scale that to be bigger or smaller, however you want to add texture. And then also the depth of it. If you want to make it super deep, you know, make it very visible, or if you want to go kind of towards the middle, show a little bit less of it, that works too. But bevel and emboss is a really cool feature. Stroke, we talked about that in the last video, or a couple videos ago, adding that red stroke around the fill. All that does is just create an outline. You can set the size of the outline, the position. By default, it's set to the inside of the lettering. I like everything to pretty much be on the outside. I usually leave opacity and blend mode the same. You can click and add whatever color you want, and then change the size of it, so you can make it massive or make it small, or however you want to. Another really cool thing with stroke is, instead of it being a solid color, you can change it to a gradient. So you can switch it to, you know, by default it's your two colors here in your color picker, but say we wanted it to be purple gradient, it'll change it. So now we got a layer style that has a really cool gradient feel to it from the top to the bottom. So there's an option there. Fill type, you can also switch to a pattern. So say you wanted your pattern to have, you know, foil or glitter exterior or something like that. So we'll go down to one of the gradients that I had created before, one of the layers, and we kind of just create like a multicolor foily glitter pattern around the exterior. So that's pretty cool, you know, especially when you want to do like an animal shape or something like that. You can add texture to the actual stroke. So stroke is super important. You will use that quite a bit. Inner shadow, we have black font here, so it's not going to show up any at all because our color is black. But say we wanted our color, you know, we changed our color to white, and we changed the mode to normal. We can bump the opacity up, and we can move the distance, and essentially it will just create the exact same shape of our letters, but on the inside of our wording. So we can make, you know, you can make the font and words look three-dimensional. It just kind of gives a little bit of depth to it, which is a cool thing to mess around with. Inner glow, kind of the same thing as the inner shadow, except for it's not as harsh of lines. So we can, you know, set the opacity a little bit higher, and you can modify the color if you want here. Right now it's just set to white by default, and it'll go from the edge. You can also set the inner glow from the center, which messes things up quite a bit, unless you make it large, but it allows you, like you see, you can go, you know, from the edge, and it just adds a little faint glow to the inside. You can drag that opacity back down so it's not as harsh, so it's not showing as much, or even bump it up even more to make, you know, your lettering look different. It's just a pretty cool feature to add that glow to the inside of something. Satin kind of gives it a satin look or a satin feel. Right now it's set to black, so that's not going to work out. So let's go say white satin, and we'll set the mode to normal. and it kind of gives it a similar to the inner glow, but it's a lot more sporadic, and you can change the way that looks by changing the distance, making the distance bigger, and it kind of gives it like that metallic-y satin look to it. You can change the size up and down, and then you can also change the contour of it. If you click the drop down, you're able to switch and move those things around to change the contour and the direction of how the satin is moving, which is a pretty cool feature. And then you have color overlay, pretty standard, pretty straightforward. Change the color of whatever it is to whatever you want it to be. So I use color overlay a lot. If I would need black text to be red, or if I pull an image from somewhere, or I created something else and I want to change that color, it's really easy to do it with this just color overlay. Change it to whatever color you want it to be. Gradient overlay, exact same deal as the color overlay. When you click on that, you've got your options for your blend mode. Normal is pretty standard, and then you can just click your gradient, whatever one you want. Then you have that gradient overlay. You can also set the angle of that, so it'll change the angle, and then you can set the scale to make it bigger or smaller, or it'll modify with the gradient. You can click on reverse. All of these options are stuff that you can mess around with. Just kind of giving you the brief overview of the layer style panel. The next thing is going to be pattern overlay, same as these last two, but it's going to overlay a pattern. So by default, I think Photoshop's first pattern is this leaves here. We want to make it leather, or we want to add metallic foil cheetah spots to it. With the patterns, you can also scale them, so you can make them smaller, or you can make them humongous. When you make them humongous, obviously it's going to pixelate patterns based on what they are. So keeping them around 100% or less is typically your best bet. You don't want to really stretch patterns out too much, but there's millions of patterns that you can get online. But I've also got some on the website, like this one here that you're looking at as a pattern that I created. So that's an option for you to get from the website. Outer glow, it works exactly the same way that inner glow works. You can change the color. So say we want to go to red, we want to add a red glow on the outside. You can change the opacity, bump it up a little bit, change the spread and the size. Right now we have it set to screen, so if you wanted to go to normal, drop the opacity down a little bit so it actually gives it more of that glow effect. Or you can even change it to darken or multiply, and it'll change, and you can just modify and move these things around. If you wanted to add noise to it, it just kind of pixelates it, so it doesn't look super great, but there's that option there. You can also make it gradient if you wanted to, so you could click on that gradient, and it would give it a little bit different look, but definitely something fun to mess around with there. And then drop shadow is probably the most used one, just because it gives depth and texture to a design. But essentially, if you leave it at black and multiply, it would probably work out just fine. But it literally just gives you that dynamic feel that your design is actually like coming off of the paper, the design of the shirt. So something that's used a lot. You can also, when you're done, if you're happy with this layer style that you have and everything looks good, you can hit OK, and it'll save that layer style for you. You can also save that style yourself as a preset. So say we wanted to create a new style, we would click that, and you can name this style whatever you want. So like drop shadow, click OK. Keep the include layer effects. You can do the blending options if you want to. I didn't have any blending options. And then add to my current library. So if you click OK, it's going to save that as a new style, which you can find here at the very top. it's going to be your last little style that's there. So you can click on that and click OK. And once you're done and you click OK, it's going to show you on your actual layer the effects, the special effects, and it's going to show you the effects, and you have drop shadow. If you click the little icon next to the effects, it will take all of those away and it'll show you what it looks like originally. You can show them again. If you wanted to, you could create a new layer. So we'll just do new layer, and we're happy with that there. And we wanted to add this same layer style to that. There's two ways to do that. We could go and double click here, and we could go back over to styles, and we could click that style preset that we had saved, and it'll add that layer style to it. But we'll hit cancel. The other way to do that would be to right click the first layer, and then go down that list and find copy layer style, and then if you right click the new layer, you scroll down, you'll see paste layer style. So it'll paste that new layer style. So those are two ways to copy the same style over. That is the basic overview of the layer styles panel. It is extremely versatile. It does not have to be a text layer that you're working with. You can make, you can do shapes with it. A big thing that's extremely popular is the shapes with the the cheetah backgrounds on the variety of different shapes with like mama and all that stuff. So like a cool thing you could do would be like watercolor spot brushes, or brushes that I created. We could take a brush here, create a new layer. We'll downsize the brush so that it fits. We'll stamp it there. It's just a black watercolor spot outline. If we were to double click on that, it'll pop up our layer styles here. We can go to pattern overlay and literally add a pattern over the top of that if we wanted to do some kind of cheetah print or something like that. It cut that off because the pattern we have as lower, so in order to fix that, what we do is we have it set to scale at 57. You just drag that scale up to however you want it to be. The smaller you are, obviously it's gonna show the border lines when it's trying to repeat the pattern. So just be mindful of that when you're adding it to it. But that'll create a nice little pattern there. And say we wanted to, if we added a drop shadow to it, the drop shadow doesn't look great because there's little textures and stuff that are out here from the original paint. But yeah, I mean that's the basic idea of it. You can add anything to a layer and make designs and shapes and things pretty cool and stand out pretty well using the layer styles panel. Layer styles are massively important. So we wanted to make this stand out a little bit better. We'll click on that and we can put a bevel on it and change the color to something else. Let's change it to white. But that is the basic overview for the layer style panel. The next video I'm going to talk about is going to be these adjustment layers down here at the bottom, and then that will be it for the layers panel in total. And then I will talk briefly about the filters and different things that you can do using filters. So we will see you in the next video.